that recording is happening. Okay, so first things first, let me share my screen with you. And that should be working now. John, could you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Excellent. Well, there you go. It's worked. Technology, eh? Just going to pop the chat over there. Great. Okay, so John's actually going to present the first section of this afternoon, but I wanted, just by way of introduction, to give you some insight as to effectively why we've put this masterclass together. And really why marketing and communications are particularly relevant at the moment. So we've been spending a lot of time talking to Matt recently. Bear with me a second. I think someone's trying to get in. There we go. Okay. Apologies for that. I might break off every now and again just to let somebody in if they're a little bit late to the show. So yeah, as I say, John and I have both been chatting to lots of multi-academy trusts, specifically following the delivery of the government's white paper and all of the things that were said. We've been waiting a long time really to know what the direction is going to be with regards to multi-academy trusts and what the direction is going to be for all of those schools really that haven't jumped yet, haven't made those decisions, and what the vision of the government is going to be for MATs moving forward. Quite a lot of discussion around that. There's been some recent discussion from people wondering whether if there's a change in government, particularly with what's been going on over the last few weeks, but if there is a change in government, you know, is the Labour Party likely to carry on with that? And most commentators that I've spoken to would suggest that actually we think this is pretty much set in stone. This is something that is going to plough forward, and actually by 2030, any government that's in power is going to want every school to be part of this strong and viable MAT. That's a point of contention as to what on earth a strong and viable MAT actually is. It's outlined in the white paper as a MAT that consists of up to 10 schools, 7,500 pupils, but we wait to see how that might amend itself. I certainly have got clients that in order to have 7,500 pupils would probably need 1 million schools. You know, they've got small primary. There are small primary MATs, and if they had 10 schools, they wouldn't have anything like 7,500 pupils. So we wait to see how that develops and how that amends. But it's interesting to note that 75% of all MATs are fewer than 5 schools. They don't fit this description of strong and viable MATs. And the conclusion that we draw from that is that there's going to be a great deal of movement towards the growth of existing multi-academy trusts at the moment. There will still be the development of new multi-academy trusts, but the days of schools setting up as independent academies, etc., really gone. I think that boat has sailed, and it's very unlikely that that will happen. So the feedback that I'm getting really from Matt is there is now this impetus towards making sure that we know how we're going to grow and what that looks like. And John's going to talk quite a lot about how you can strategically put those ideas together and get a handle on that. So to give you some idea, that's just painting the picture of the situation that we're in. And I apologize if I'm teaching my granny to suck eggs there, because I'm sure you all know the situation that we're in. So we're looking at the role of marketing and communications and what that can play in that environment and why that's important. So we this afternoon are going to outline 5 key steps really, and John will present the first 3 of those. So he's going to look at a communications and marketing strategy. He'll then look at the communications and marketing function, and perhaps most importantly explain the difference between those and what those definitions mean, and then looking at how your marketing and communications can help with attracting new schools, influencing stakeholders, and just improving those internal communications and trust cohesion. And then I'll move on to look at specifically how you develop that trust brand identity. It's a question I'm getting asked all the time at the moment. And then a specific look at websites. It's an interesting topic. It's something that if you ask any school about marketing, it's kind of what they think you're talking about. But it's a hot topic at the moment because there's a great deal of opportunity there in terms of MAT growth and MAT structure. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to ask John from Glove to share his screen, John will do a perfectly adequate job of introducing himself, so I won't attempt to do that. So John, if you can share your screen, it should allow you to do that straight away. Great.
Hopefully this is all now working.
Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
Super. That's very good. Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks
problem.
for inviting us along today to have a chat about using marketing and communications marcoms to grow your multi-academy trust. So a quick 30-second introduction to Glove Consulting. All right, that doesn't seem to be moving on. Be a second. There we go. Fourth time lucky. So Glove was founded by myself back in 2012 now, and I've been involved in education comms since 1996, since I left university. And so since 2012 and since 1996, we've been extraordinarily lucky, I guess, to see so many changes and so many evolutions within the educational landscape around its organisation. I think when I first started, there were things called grant maintained schools, which were sort of like the first proto academies in relation to being directly funded from central government. And I've seen the evolution of those all the way through the first kind of like iteration of academies, things under New Labour, building schools for the future, academy converters, and then all the way through to the establishment of multi-academy trusts. When working with obviously many academy trusts, maintained schools, and also independent schools nationwide. So we certainly know this landscape really, really well. As Mark said, there'll be opportunities for you to find out a little bit more about us anyway, going forward in relation to the emails that you'll receive. But in relation to looking at multi-academy trust growth, certainly the services that we have and the things that we can bring to bear for you, which are listed there, are certainly very much developed and designed with things that you need to do in mind. So, as we said, the presentation today, the webinar today, is about using marketing communications to grow your trust, and Mark outlined what those 5 are going to be. And I'll pick up on the first one, which is a communications and marketing strategy. So what I'm not going to do is to tell you specifically how to lay out a strategy on a spreadsheet or something like that. You people are no doubt all well aware of how to look at things around action planning, etc. But again, because we've got such a broad range perhaps of people who are attending today's masterclass, and also because it isn't necessarily true that everyone within education understands what communications and marketing actually is and what it's for. I thought I'd start quite simply, really, just to give people an idea about what it is that we're looking to do through communications and marketing strategy. So the process of selling your trust, and let's not be too squeamish about these things, that if we're encouraging organizations to come and join us, we can use language such as engagement and encouragement. But as marketing professionals, what we need to do is to be very, very pragmatic, understand that this is about getting out there and selling your organization, selling your trust. And that follows then the basics of all sales marcoms. And there's lots and lots of, if you want to go on Google, or if people are already involved in things like Chartered Institute of Marketing or other business aspect of communications, some of this will be very familiar to you. But for instance, one way in which we can start to think about a framework for building a strategy, something like the 7 Ps. I guarantee that if you sort of like, depending upon the multi-academy trust that you're in and the leadership that you have, it's that once we start to present this kind of information and language into an organization, then we can start to really pull out the thinking from individuals, from trust leaders, so that then we can mold that into good messaging and good narrative. And that's where we need to start. So 7 Ps. And be interesting for you. This isn't a piece of work to do or anything, but it'd be very helpful, I'm sure, to note these down and then just start to think for yourselves about, okay, well, what as we do as a multi-academy trust in our schools, what actually starts to fit into some of these aspects that we're looking at here. So, as a multi-academy trust, what is your product? How do you think you would go around promoting that product? What's the price aspect of being part of your multi-academy trust? Where are you going to talk about this, and where are you going to locate yourselves? How do we talk about the people within our trust? What sort of processes do you go through to become part of your trust, or indeed when you're in your trust? And how are you evidencing the things that you do as a multi-academy trust? So what is it that is happening within your trust that you can show and evidence how good you are as an organization? And if you haven't already done something like this, it's really great just to start to map that over all the processes, all the things that you do as a trust. Remembering that the starting point for anything that you do within your organization really is reaching an agreement on and understanding the clarity around some very, very key points. Okay. Now, again, depending upon where you are on your journey, as the saying goes, you may be a trust that is extremely well developed, and that you are, ready to go, as it were. But like Mark was saying, 75% of trusts are, fewer than 5 schools. And a lot of the trusts that we work with are in that kind of category where perhaps come together as a trust that is almost like fallen together, or it's been some kind of proto-federation that's actually hardened itself into a trust, hasn't actually sat down and thought very specifically about these particular points. So, what is your actual vision as an organization? And by that, I mean, what is it that you can easily communicate about what you are going to do over the next 1, 3, 5 years? What are your values as an organization? What are you going to communicate to people about how you go around doing things? Values are behaviors, and it is the way in which you express yourself when you're carrying out your vision. These are the things that are extremely pertinent to communications and marketing in when you're bringing on your new schools or trusts into your trust. Because this is all then about describing and demonstrating what your culture is. Now, we all know that in very well developed multi-academy trusts, it's really clear what their cultures are. The example that people always pull out is somewhere like United Learning Trust. And automatically we see through the physical evidence and the way they go about their work is that it's really clear to understand what their culture is. So we're not saying that everyone has to have a monoculture, perhaps like United Learning Trust do. What we are saying is it's so important that you communicate effectively what your culture actually is. From a business point of view, you need to know what your intent is going to be. And that really is because as marketers, what we need to know is what we're trying to do. What is it we are trying to actually help our organization to do? And by intent, therefore, going back to some of the things on the 7 Ps, it's where are we going to do our work? And so when you're looking at growth, you need to start putting some parameters together. Geographical parameters, type of school, and certainly some of these are places and things that you will decide not to approach as well as you will approach. And also some idea about rate of growth. Now, very interestingly, there'll be all kind of conversations perhaps between things like chair of trustees and CEO about what is sustainable growth, as Mark was talking about earlier, what actually needs to happen by 2030. Also remembering that the strong trust definition is really a minimum. The point being that that is about viability. So the FEA is saying that you can only be viable at that sort of size. So that is a bare minimum, not necessarily a target. So again, these are the things that you as marketers need to pull out from your leadership so that you can then set an appropriate strategy. And then the approach for the organization is also very similar and linked into culture. So again, so that we're communicating in an honest and transparent fashion, it's no point in talking to a school that's going to join you and saying everything that they want to hear to allow them to join. And therefore, when they join, they discover that what they've been sold isn't necessarily correct, and that your approach as an organization doesn't match what it is that you said. So again, that's aligned with things around school improvement. It's aligned with things to do with approach to financial matters, whether schools can keep their reserves or not, etc., etc. And also, clearly, what we need to understand as marketers is what success looks like. So this is tied into intent. And so what we need to understand is, from a trustee and an executive leadership point of view, is, okay, are we trying to help you to get one school this year, two schools next year, etc.? So what are some of our key performance indicators that allow us as marketers then to understand that, yes, we are on the right track? Now, my point of view is that even before you would start constructing a communication strategy around growing your trust, is that unless you've got these things, unless these things are evident and easily accessible and at least have been written down somewhere and agreed, then it's going to be very difficult for you to start to grow your mat effectively. So the first thing as ever is to get that first step sorted, because otherwise it's going to be just essentially a waste of time trying to communicate to organisations. And another good indicator of the things that we need to do before we start to construct a communication strategy is looking at developing and communicating the offer. So it's about developing the narrative. So what we said here is that these are the starting points. Okay. Part of what we need to do as communicators and as marketers is to look at those key points and then interrogate them to make sure that the things that are being said are benefit-led and have the ability to actually be attractive to the market. That's quite a strategic-based conversation, and it's important that as marketers we're involved at that level, because what we want to make sure is that if, for instance, we do our work, our market research work with marketers, and understand that across our particular area that's been chosen by the trust is that actually there are very few schools who aren't already part of multi-academy trusts. And so we need to make sure that those decisions that are being made are actually realistic. So what we need to do is interrogate things like the aims, the visions, and the values of the organisation to make sure that we believe that they are palatable and in line with what the strategic objectives of the organisation are. Similarly, the journey and the destination also need to be examined and make sure that they are realistic. And certainly how we start to communicate the culture and the approach of the multi-academy trust. And this is where we need to start thinking about what language we're going to develop, making sure that the language fits our strategic development and the way that the trust wants to move. But also, very clearly, what specific benefits are there to being part of your trust? Now, a good friend of mine always says, all trusts are all the same. They're all trying to do the same thing. And broadly, he's right, because at the end of the day, what we're all doing is looking for the best outcomes for the young people within who are being educated within that trust. But there are lots of adjuncts to that. So, number one, we need to make sure that we're looking after the trust as a whole. So that means that we're also looking after our staff effectively, remembering that trusts are a single employer. Also, we need to understand things like how our governance works and how we communicate that effectively. Similarly, all our service points within an organisation need to be looked at, and the narrative needs to be fashioned about all those services to make sure that those specific benefits come out very clearly. Now, that crosses all those kind of business streams that you may share an office with or sit next to within your trust. But very specifically, it's understanding the benefits around IT, around HR and people, around estates, around finance, so that as marketers, what you need to do is construct narrative around that to make sure that it is absolutely the best quality communication so that people understand what it is that you're doing as a trust. Okay. The other thing you need to think about is, what is your market? So we were talking earlier about how we need to understand about the journey and about the intent of the trust. Now, as I'm sure you'll know, is that we generally need to speak to different people in different ways. That's not to say that we can't generate a good, solid plan in relation to hierarchy of information, for instance, where we have good quality, constant messaging around our corporate aims, our vision and values, etc. But what we do need to do as marketers is to help our leaders think about the ways in which we're going to go out and do things and what we're going to say. And those things change depending on our area of focus for growth, how we're going to grow. So, simple quadrant here, split into 4. I'm going to pick in the first instance the least obvious definition of growth, because everyone's quite focused on growing numbers of schools. And that is clearly something that the government wants multi-academy trusts to do and would be a normal definition. Certainly, bottom left as I look at this, services including education. The growth that we can bring, therefore, in relation to income coming into a trust by the provision of services. So those services, if we think we're interested in marketing, the ability for us to do HR with other people, our IT, our estates and groundwork, etc. A very valid way to think about growth. And also, is that therefore try before you buy as well? So not only are we generating income, but we can look to grow the membership of our trust through the effective provision of services into other organisations, i.e. they get to experience what some of the services are actually like and whether they are of high enough quality and high enough benefit for them. I've also included education support in there as well. So since the demise of teaching schools and the growth of teaching school hub, clearly that's slightly different now, but nonetheless, there's quite a lot of trusts out there that have maintained their legacy teaching schools and sort of like adapted them into CPD, and CPD looking at school-to-school support. So again, it's another way of growing your influence. And so what I want you to do is think about growth in lots of different ways, as opposed to just getting other schools on. We'll go around the rest clockwise, starting top left, schools and trusts by choice. So again, what we're saying there is that clearly we need to understand how we think we're going to encourage schools and trusts to join us through a proactive, positive choice. Okay, and that's really important to think about, is that proactivity and that positivity is there, so that then people are coming to us in an engaged fashion, because that will make things a whole lot easier as we go along. That's all the way from just basic induction, all the way through to trust cohesion and making sure that we understand that the schools that trusts are coming to join us are wholeheartedly coming to join. Now, there's also ways of growing through things like free school and significant change. So free schools, just to sure everyone knows what they are, but that's the formation of a brand new organisation, a school, that will often come out from a presumptive route these days in relation to a local authority requiring extra school places, and therefore will go out to tender, in inverted commas, to a number of trusts to see who would be best to open and run that school on their behalf in relation to getting the number of places. So again, we can see how marketing communications is of huge benefit there in relation to putting together a really viable bid. And yes, whilst there's a technical aspect of bid writing that clearly marcoms don't necessarily always get involved in, around that in terms of the vision and the values and the evidencing, absolutely squarely in our court, and so that we really need to do a really good job on that if that's something that our trusts do. Similarly, with a significant change, it might be that we've decided that we would want to try to move from an 11 to 16 to 11 to 19, or we're looking to do other aspects, something like some alternative provision or AP. Again, anything that requires communication is squarely in our court as communicators and marketers. We need to help them do that. And then sponsorship or rebrokering. So this is, what people sometimes think about in relation to trust growth, as well as trust and schools joining by choice. And often this is where academy leaders get a little bit worried about words like capacity. Because if we're taking on a school that requires sponsorship, so this would be perhaps a school that's been subject to an academisation order, so a local authority school essentially being required to change into an academy, and there's lots of reasons why that might happen, and those reasons do tend to put an amount of stress onto an existing organisation. So automatically we can see a place for communications and marketing within that growth area. Also, by the way, sponsorship tends to happen via a bit of a beauty parade, where 3 or 4 multi-academy trusts will be highlighted to the school who they may want to choose to join. So in a way, it is coming round to being more like schools and trust by choice. Certainly, the way in which we want to communicate to a school joining us in a position of some weakness is really key, because they're going to feel very, very worried and very, very anxious about what's going to happen. But similarly, from a rebrokering point of view, so we're going to see much more rebrokering going on, which is the movement of singular schools from one trust into another trust, or indeed the entire movement of other trusts into other trusts as well. I've been involved in 2 or 3 trust level rebrokering now, and that you can imagine the comms that's required around doing that across multiple schools is really, really interesting. But drawing back out from that, looking at what within your strategy you would need to understand is, okay, well, in what order are we going to look at these different markets? What opportunities are there already there? And how are we going to tailor our messaging and the way in which we want to go around talking to organisations to make sure that we're putting those footsteps in the right order at the right time? So hopefully across that first section, you can see all the aspects, all the pieces of the jigsaw that need to be in place before you can start to pretty much write down what it is you're going to do and when. So let's move on now to part 2, keeping an eye on the time as well, so I'm very aware of that, is a really fundamental part of what we've just talked about, actually, is, and I'm not, again, we don't know who's with us, but certainly there is the need for a recognised communications and marketing function with in any multi-academy trust. And as you can probably imagine, it's my mission to make sure that communications and marketing is seen as a valuable income, valuable business stream, as HR, as IT, as finance, all the things, all the people that sit around, it absolutely is so key to the way in which the whole organisation works. I would certainly say that communication is everything, and everything that that your trust says, either internally or externally, is so important, and should not be left to chance. So again, one of the main planks in the platform of any good multi-academy trust strategy is the ability for that strategy to be executed effectively. And for me, that means a communication and marketing function. So the kind of like concept behind that is the idea that within the multi-academy trust, we've got certain different things that we want to be saying, that all really come from the central section. And what we're seeing here is that there's different levels and different channels of communication that we want to bring through. So if we start at the top, we've got to understand that what we need to do is from a corporate point of view, is communicate very specifically things like the vision, the values, but also things such as whether you've been successful as a corporate organization in accessing funding, or something specific that someone's had published, or success indeed around things like Ofsted. So we need to understand that that's the communication channel. I'm going to go left actually on this one. Similarly, in terms of multi-academy trust services, so whether you're putting together school-to-school support, or whether you're putting together things like CPD, or indeed whether you're selling out your catering, your facilities hire, your finance, back office, etc. And clearly that's a very clear communication stream that needs to be understood and planned for. And then we've got things what we call MAT specific. So that's very individual point within the multi-academy trust, things that happen organically, if that makes sense. Now, what we're wanting to do there is look for examples of how the trust is enacting its vision and values. So very specifically, evidencing, and you remember going back to talking about evidencing earlier on in the slides, your MAT specific is where you're evidencing your vision and your values. And then one of the biggest things that we need to understand is that schools within your multi-academy trust are actually the biggest evidences of your vision and values. And so we need to be really clear about how well our schools are communicating themselves. Are they good at communicating? Okay, because if they're not good at communicating, then they are not going to be able to communicate how good the trust that they belong to. Okay, and also we as a trust, everything that they do as a school is part of the trust. It belongs to the trust. So every success that the school experiences is the direct result of being part of the trust. Now, that doesn't mean is that the trust takes credit for absolutely everything and the school gets credit for nothing. And in a way, that's a classical conversation anyway. But what we can do is make sure that the successes of schools are reinforced by the trust and are also linked to the trust, especially through vision and value. Last one, MAT recruitment. Gosh, recruitment and retention, people strategies. It's huge. I mean, you know, apart from talking about whether schools are effective at communicating in relation to pupil admissions, which is clearly an existential issue, and on the risk indicator in relation to whether there's enough money coming into the trust via students, clearly one of the biggest existential threats that exist to education at the moment is through recruitment of staff. So again, the comms output, deploying your narrative and making sure that through your MAT recruitment, your people strategy, your recruitment and retention, that's one of the hugest places that you need to be really singing loud about your organization and how good it is. Why should I come and work for you? So that is a concept, that is a map, is almost like a communications map about those are the kind of things you need to be concentrating on as a central multi-academy trust communications function, making sure those things are happening. what the function looks like itself in relation to a personnel structure. This is just an example. So we might see there's a CEO, there are a group of group of individuals that we might be called service directors. So that might be director of IT, director of HR, etc., etc., etc. And then also the school leaders, so teachers, principals, heads of school. Sat very much connected to everyone is something like a communications and marketing manager. And what they are there to do is that they are there to help the service directors communicate effectively about what they need to communicate effectively about to hit their KPIs and hit their targets and realize their strategic objectives. They're there to assist school leaders in hitting their targets in relation to pupil numbers, but also in relation to some targets around making sure that they're communicating what's going on effectively in their schools. So all the things that we want to talk about, school life, school character, things like that. But what we also recommend is that, and some trusts will think, oh, well, and then the comms and marketing manager does all that for the schools. No, they do not do that for the schools. They're far too busy doing it for themselves in relation to the communication management task. It's school communications operatives. So that can be often a school administrator or a person who's also connected to the community. So what we recommend is that there's a nominated individual within each of your schools that is generally line managed by the school leaders, but absolutely told what to do in inverted commas by the comms and marketing manager, and that they lead that team, and that then becomes very, very clearly part of that team. And what would they do? So they're responsible for all aspects of marketing, of the marketing function. And, they're responsible for designing, developing, implementing a tangible marketing and communication strategy for the trust. So what we believe is that it is at this level that strategy needs to be developed. Okay. That then also suggests, as you could probably imagine, that we believe that the level of person undertaking communications and marketing management needs to be a person who can put together a viable strategy, can put together a viable plan to encourage growth and communication across the whole organisation. Now, there's lots of ways in which that can be encouraged to happen, and clearly lots need help doing that. And indeed, that's one of the reasons why we exist, to help people put all this into action, and also then, help them develop things like strategies so that they are putting together. But they are expected to play an active hands-on role in all aspects of the trust comms, and provide that strategic input and support and advice. So again, you can see that where we started off talking about this in development of a strategy is that as communicators, as marketers, it's our job to make sure that we are having that strategic input, because it's within our skill set to understand the communication and marketing opportunities and look at what is going to be an easier way forward or a harder way forward. Well, the key duties there: develop a strategic communications and marketing plan to support strategic goals, manage the budgets, manage resources, manage marketing spend, and ensure that the activities are planned, agreed within budgets, and promote good marketing practice across the trust, supporting colleagues as required. But that is the start of a JD. That is the start of a job description. Clearly, there's lots of other bits in there. But often I've had a head teacher in one trust where we proposed the employment of a marketing communications manager. Say, well, what are they going to do? We don't need one. And what else are they going to do for the 4 days a week? Within any good multi-academy trust, communications and marketing people are the busiest people within that organisation. So, and then we're looking then at how Marcom can help specifically in attracting new schools to join your MAT, influencing national and regional stakeholders, and improving internal communications and trust cohesion. Point a bit about point C about why improving internal comms and trust cohesion is important for getting new schools to join your trust is that if you're not presenting a coherent image, a coherent understanding of what actually going on within your trust and what being part of your trust is like, and that your trust is a cohesive unit, then that's not going to encourage anyone to join you, because it will make you look disorganized and it will make you look disparate. Irrespective of whether people think that they should have more or less autonomy, that's not going to help anyone. So attracting new schools to join your mat, what should you actually do? So these are some of the things that you can see coming through maybe into specific points in a marketing and communication strategy, and at this point probably plan. So absolutely you need to help leaders develop and communicate the trust growth plan. Okay, going back to that original point about, yes, you need to be helping them put that together so it's realistic, and that therefore then we understand what it is and then we can communicate it properly. We need to build a narrative and apply it to collateral. Just as a tip, the best way to do that is to think, okay, my CEO is going to go and stand in front of a chair of governors and head teacher with a PowerPoint, and he's going to tell them what our trust is like and why they should join it. And if you start at that very pointy end of a tactical process, very quickly allows you to focus on what are we going to say about all different aspects of our trust. Going to broadcast evidence of successes via social media and email newsletters. You're going to engage directly with potential new members, and directly is a really interesting word there, because often CEOs will sit in front of me and go, well, what do I do? And you go, well, you ring people up, you know, or you write them a letter, or you bump into them and have a brew. But that's what engaging directly actually means, because 4/5 of this process is about relationships. And so encouraging, as marketers, encouraging your main trust leaders to engage in building relationships for collaboration and growth is really, really important. And quite a few trusts now are holding information events for potential new members. Some of those are in person, some of those are online. But whereupon before the white paper, that would have perhaps seen as a little bit aggressive and a little bit as empire building. Now people are actually glad, because there is a dearth of information. There is no information coming out of RSCs or the regional directors' offices about what does it actually mean to be a MAT, an academy in a MAT. And do not underestimate the levels of non-information that people have in the maintained tool sector about what it actually means to be part of the trust. Certainly ensure all networks are examined and engaged with. And so that again is thinking, okay, so what networks around us are pertinent for us to be active in and understand what's going on, so that then we know who and what and when and why schools are looking to join particular trusts. That might be local education partnerships, keeping close to things like teaching school hubs, etc. All those networks, the primary networks, etc. And definitely communicate to the regional schools commissioner or the regional director, they're now called, that you are open for business. Because I know from personal experience that some regional directors and their relationship managers are ringing up trusts, obviously asking them for their growth plans. And so what you need to be is in a position to say, oh yeah, we're already here, or indeed proactively sending those to the regional schools commissioner's office. And we are here, we are ready for business. This is what our plan is, and this is what we actually want to do. Influencing national and regional stakeholders, it's very similar things. And whilst we're splitting these things up, it is all part of a holistic plan. So broadcasting your evidence, ensuring all networks are examined and engaged with, being part of the conversation. Again, even on a local level, never mind regional or national, if you can encourage your trust leaders to be part of the conversations that are going on, if they can be knowledge sharing, if they can be seen as a person of integrity who wants to help other people understand what's going on, then being part of the conversation is brilliant. And obviously, again, communicating with the RSC, the regional directors that you are. And improving internal comms, just really quickly towards the end here. Again, going back to this idea about what the trust is, the trust is not a separate entity from its member schools or other organisations within that. And the trust certainly isn't a central team. And that's, again, one of the hardest things that we come across it again and again and again. Schools talking about the trust as if they are not part of the trust. And that will always happen. There are no quick fixes to that. But that is squarely down to communication. And indeed, the communication of all the other strands that go together to make up that organisation. I'll show you what I mean by that. So remember, centralised comms done correctly will lead to trust cohesion. I've already shown you that our comms mapping specifically builds in aspects of the schools communicating, the trust communicating around people coming to work for the trust. And again, that doesn't mean into the central team. It means the trust recruiting into schools as well. And it's understanding and helping organisations pull that together. And similarly, within the trust structure, what we've got there is that we've got a comms and marketing manager linking specifically into school leaders and linking specifically into the operatives within the schools, so that, again, it's within the communicators and marketing managers' gift to make sure that the trust as a holistic whole message comes through. Now, how that balances off in relation to your trust culture, your approach, how ULT you want to be or how less ULT you want to be, that's up to you as an organisation. That's absolutely fine. But as long as you know what you're trying to do, then you can bring the tools together to do it. And branding of your trust and schools is key. And so Mark's going to touch on this a little bit anyway. But I just wanted to nip through a really good example of some work that we've done together down in North London, Search Education Trust. So really nice, strong trust branding. So this is their newish brand. Smashing strapline there, smashing intent, strong, sustainable, successful schools, and quite a business line on that one. So again, a really nice set of words there that we can get our teeth into as communicators. So again, well deployed resources, clear, very visible, and a bit different as well. But then, how are the schools branded within this organisation? And as you can see, is that they are not uniformly branded, because this is about an element of schools retaining their identity and autonomy. Going back to approach, going back to culture, making sure that this is very much part of explaining who you are and what you do. Because one of the questions that trusts get asked most often is, will I keep my name? Are you going to rebrand me? And so those are decisions that trust leaders need to make. But what we can see on here, specifically on the ones on the left as well, is that the combination, making sure that the trust identity is absolutely associated with those organisations. So you can see on the bottom of the prospectus, top left, sign, bottom left, and the website, bottom right, and also on the business cards as well, is that every single time we clearly identify the school with the trust. But they're the same on the other school within the trust at the moment as well. Same, uniform, controlled. But then there are also things that, as a wider point of view, we need to take into consideration when it comes to trust cohesion. Now, again, as communicators, some of these things will come to us as second nature, but it's our job to break down the silos and break into other areas, so that then we can say, look, these are the kind of things you need to be doing to make it really cohesive. So, trust people strategy. Okay, so how are we moving CPD, HR, what messages are we moving through all our people? Not forgetting that single employer. Okay, the schools do not employ people, the trust employs people. So therefore it is beholden on the trust to make sure that we are communicating our vision, our values, our expectations to those people effectively. So trust-wide CPD model and provision, awards and rewards for staff and students, roadshows, how are the central team going around our organisation talking about it, and things like trust inter-school colleges, college. All these things are really key to bringing together a trust into a cohesive thing. So that's the end of my bit. Just to say that how we can work together, our process is the fact that what we do is that we put proposals together based on your particular situation, and then we move through a consultation and an audit point where we will get to providing you with a full report and a full strategy and action plan. That's the basis of our movement forward. And I'll hand over to Mark.
Schoolboy error. I was still on mute, but there you go.
So 2020.
John, if you could just end your share, that would be ideal. So thank you very much. And I will share my screen again with you all. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen again. Yes. Good. Okay. I'm just going to bring the chat back up, and thank you to those of you who've contacted me directly during John's chat. I've tried to provide you with the information you've asked for, but if you need anything else, do let me know. Just before I start, John, it was interesting that you used the search examples, because I think you and I have come across a number of trusts in the same situation, which is they wanted to develop coherent branding across the trust and its schools, but there was no way on earth that the schools' logos, etc., could be amended. You know, pupil uniforms, signage, the cost involved with that. And we have a number of times now worked around that to develop, you know, the trust brand, and then just bringing in the existing school brands, expanding that, making sure that there's a, you know, there's a brand identity to it, really, which is exactly what we did at Search. We've done it with a number of others. If you're in that situation, it's very familiar. You know, it's rare that a trust will turn around and say, Mark, you can rebrand the trust, and do you mind rebranding all of our schools at the same time? It really rarely happens like that. Brilliant if it does, but that doesn't preclude your ability to develop that brand, is what we're saying. It's worth considering. Okay, thank you, John. I found that really interesting. Even though I've worked with you for a long time now and know everything that you do, it's always interesting to hear that. From our point of view, from Blue Apple's point of view, I'll give you a little introduction as to who we are. But specifically, we enjoy and like working with John, because I've seen historically lots and lots of schools that have invested in consultancy and recognized the need for themselves to start looking strategically at what they're doing, having that sort of plan and strategy put together, but then not really having the skills in place to follow that through, really. So very nice report, something that's really shiny, gets delivered, and then no real change happens after that. And what I've really enjoyed about working with you, John, and with the trust that we've worked with, is how we've been able to work collaboratively to not just tell trusts what they should do, but actually help and support, make sure that happens. And your involvement with, you know, recruiting new marketing managers, etc., and just being there, I think is invaluable, really, especially at the sort of stage that we're at the moment. So I'm waffling now. So without further ado, I'll sort of tell you a little bit about Blue Apple Education. Guys, the best way to think about us is we're a creative design company. We provide everything that schools, colleges, multi-academy trusts need to market and communicate. And there are two fundamental things that underpin those relationships that we develop with our clients. The first one we call unearthing the remarkable, and the second we call producing results, really. Now, the reason I mention those today is they also underpin not only the biggest mistakes, I think, that MATs make when they're setting about their marketing and communications, but also they underpin how we develop our relationship. Unearthing the remarkable is really developing that brand, is making sure that you understand how to talk about yourselves, what it is that schools are going to value in you as a trust, what your stakeholders value, and then making sure that that is actually reflected in the way that you communicate. Lots of trusts can tell us what's special about them, but actually from the way that they present themselves to the outside world, that's not particularly evident. Our job is to put that together, really, to join the dots and make sure that that's right. And the second, really touching on lots of the things that John talked about, is making sure that any marketing that is put together fits into that strategy, that we understand what it's designed to do. Should it actually be happening? A lot of school marketing, in particular, and academy marketing, is done because the academy thinks they should probably do it, or there's no real strategy behind it happening. So questioning that, challenging it, making sure that's in place means that the marketing we create for schools and trusts is effective, does what you need it to do. Okay, just a little bit about myself, very, very briefly, so you know why I'm qualified to chat to you on this. I talk at lots and lots of events, actually in face-to-face, back again now, which has been really, really nice, but online over the last few years, lots and lots of that. I also sit on the Matter advisory board. So the Matter is the Multi-Academy Trust Association, and the advisory board is a free service to all of Matter's members, which is a free association to join, where leaders of trusts can ask questions around a whole host of different topics. And there's lots of us that specialize in different areas. So I sit there as the marketing and communication specialist, providing help and guidance to trusts that need it and request it. I also host Out of the Blue, which is a video podcast. There's over 40 episodes of that. We talk about lots and lots of different topics. I think John's actually on one episode of that. Pretty sure we invited him along. Lots of people that come in and talk about lots of different things. He's nodding away. Yes, I do remember, John. I was only pretending not to. So if you remember at the front end, we mentioned that we were going to talk you through 5 steps this afternoon. And John has talked you through the first 3 of those. So specifically, I'm going to move on now at actually how you go about developing that trust brand identity. So John started that whole process explaining that that's what needs to happen. So how do we actually do that, and what can that look like? And I'm then going to look at something specific, which is looking at websites as a centralized service. Websites seem to be something that there are lots of frustrations about. It's the thing I hear most about that trusts have issues and problems and, as I say, frustrations with. So we'll chat through what those frustrations are and what some of the answers could be to that. Okay. This touches on some of what John was talking about, but just I wanted to question why that brand identity is important. I think John has explained some of that, but at the moment there is a great deal of increased competition. So there are more and more trusts that are recognizing the role that marketing can take. If you'd have looked sort of 4 or 5 years ago, there wasn't a great deal of that happening. But as John's mentioned, he's been involved with actually helping trusts recruit marketing managers. If you go on to Indeed, the TES, lots of those job boards, I looked last week and there were 7 trusts recruiting for a marketing manager at the moment. So we know that trusts are waking up to the need of this. Your competition is waking up to the need to make sure that they've got this strategy in place. And just the growth plans that trusts are developing now means that your competition is seeking out professional help. So we hear more from multi-academy trusts than we do from individual schools than we've ever done. Really, the key is all about how your trust starts to develop the loudest voice. So we know that schools are facing a number of options now. When those schools that are sat on the fence have perhaps decided they didn't know which way to jump, they haven't academized yet. They kind of report the reasons they've not done that being, loss of autonomy, those sorts of fears that they've got. They are going to have to start making a decision. They are going to have to start to decide where they're going to place themselves. And there will be a number of options available. What's important is that when they are researching those, that your voice is the loudest voice they hear about your trust. And the key is to make sure that that happens. And if you question whether that's the case at the moment, that can be a real powerful incentive to make sure that we can get that in place for you. So Why would a prospective school join your trust? So again, this is all about the things that John's mentioned there, the vision and value, evidencing your vision and value in the way that you communicate, and really giving schools a reason to engage with you and ultimately choose your trust to join. And again, John sort of mentioned about the internal communications and that feeling of togetherness across school environments. Do staff feel part of the trust? You know, John was talking about the trust just being that central team, or is it everybody and every member of staff within a trust? So that links back to your strong staff recruitment and the development that we've already chatted about. Some of the common issues that I see in trusts right now, right at the moment, is there is often a lack of marketing experience within trusts, and trusts are relaying that to me. So that they are recognizing the need now to get better at doing this, but actually feeling that there isn't the experience within their senior leadership team to have an effect on it. There is a lack of trust often in marketing effectiveness. People who've been in education for a long time often view marketing as websites and not much else, and have had all sorts of issues with websites, and have rarely seen strategic marketing plans that have been followed through and produced results, as perhaps you would see more in a commercial setting. So our job is to develop and build that trust in the process and make sure that you can trust that what you're going to do is going to have the effect that you want it to. And that, again, is all about the strategy and planning that John's been chatting about. Some other common issues really are that there is a great deal of vanilla brand messaging within trusts. So that messaging is just getting lost in I've called it an ocean of similarity, effectively seeing the same sorts of messages coming out from lots and lots of different trusts. Makes it very difficult for a school to understand why they would be engaging with one or the other, and you know that's not creating an impetus for them. That lack of plan or strategy can very often lead to a very reactive way of marketing. So it will be someone on the SLT mentioning, I've seen a trust who's very active on Facebook. We should be doing that. And there's no real plan as to why they're doing it, or an understanding other than we think we probably should. Having the strategy and the plan in place, as John has described there, gives you that confidence. It allows you to say, that's okay. They're allowed to do that. They can carry on doing that. It's not part of our plans at the moment. And you can be very comfortable and confident with that. So where do you start with this? How do we go from this sort of theory that we've been chatting about to actually starting to actually communicate about ourselves in an effective way? Well, the first thing we do is to ask this question. It's a fundamental question that we should always ask. It's the starting point of how we help trusts develop their identity. And that is to ask the question, what is remarkable about your trust? What type of multi-academy trust are you? What is that first impression that you want to present? What is it that you would want people to report with their first experience of your mat? What's the character, the nature? What is it that people value in you? So start a question around those issues. And then when you've got that together and you've got an idea of what you represent, is that unique? Because if you're finding that the answers that come back are things like, we have a family feel, we provide centralized services, then chances are the way that you're going to talk about yourselves isn't going to be particularly identifiable. It's not going to stand out from the crowd of other trusts. So take a look at what other trusts are doing in your area. How are they messaging? Because it's important that we are going to stand out. If you were a school looking to academize, which trust would you choose? Who's making that best first impression? It's a really simple exercise to do, is to just do that desktop research. Take a look at how everyone is communicating from that initial approach and just see how you're standing out. And then really, as John has mentioned, it's all about telling stories. We know there's a very famous study, the Hyder study, that shows that human beings look for a narrative, even when there aren't any. We look for stories and we relate to stories really easily. It's in our nature to do that. So what stories are available for you guys to demonstrate the remarkable? How can you show evidence of who you are and what that means? So ask that simple question, what's remarkable about our trust? Ask yourselves, ask other trust leaders, ask your staff, other stakeholders? And are all the answers that you're getting, do they all align? You may be quite surprised at the way lots of people and lots of stakeholders within the trust answer that question. And when you've got an idea of how everybody values the trust, and obviously that's an exercise that John can take you through in much, much more detail, as he's explained. But essentially, when we've got this idea of what the identity is, we can then start to look at how effectively we're communicating that idea. So this is away from the nuts and bolts of marketing and calls to action, etc. It's just fundamentally, what's our character look like? How do we present ourselves to people? So if we take Furness Education Trust, it's a trust that both John and I have worked with quite closely. And this is, as we first met with Furness, this was what I would suggest is probably one of the first exposure that you would have to the trust, because it's the homepage of their website. So often that can well be the first exposure that you're going to have. Nothing wrong with the structure of the website and who they've used to build it, perfectly adequate, does the job. But in terms of them as a trust, it's not telling me anything about who they are or what they represent. I can't really tell you much at all about that trust. I might infer that some form of mentoring amongst pupils within their schools is important, and that might be between schools. I'm assuming that it is, because we've got different age groups, but I'm guessing and I'm inferring, and I don't really have an idea of what they're about. And that's very, very common. If you look at South Pennine Academies, exactly the same thing. There's nothing wrong with that photograph, but in terms of how it promotes the trust and how it gives me a sense of who the trust is and what they stand for, I really don't know. I don't have any idea or information about it. In fact, I could carry on. There are lots and lots of examples of this where it's a professionally taken photograph, but there's no messaging on there. There's no indication of what it is that they're trying to tell me. It is a missed opportunity. It is a totally wasted space. So as that first impression, that win hearts and minds, grab hold of somebody, you now have an opportunity. They visited your website. Tell them what's important. Tell them who you are. Tell them what you stand for. Engage with them and get them involved with the information that you want to present. It's just a complete missed opportunity there. As an aside, it's worth mentioning that another mistake that those websites we've just looked at was making was that they weren't really thinking about the user journey. So they were making it very difficult for me as a prospective school to know what I want to do. So when I join the website, where do you want them to go? Where am I supposed to go here? I'm not really being guided. I've got 3 buttons at the bottom, so I can start now searching myself and moving myself around the website. But it would be much better, and this is their existing website now, to decide where you want those people to go and to have these key messaging with very prominent calls to action that mean that as someone arrives on that page, you are directing them and controlling the information that they're going to digest about your trust by guiding them through your website. So 3 opportunities. They've not just left a single picture on their homepage, but they've actually presented 3 different opportunities to create that message. Just a question in from Chris. So Chris has asked that he's found that homepages from multi-academy trusts are getting longer because people prefer scrolling to clicking. Is this something that you've found? It depends on the information that you're going to present. I think homepages are longer than they have been. There was a fashion really where navigations would actually bring you to the same page. So there was a single page website structure, so different sections, and you just have these very, very long website pages with the different sections in. That didn't last particularly long, and I think it's a happy medium between the two, if I'm honest, Chris. I think there is still, the reason people don't like clicking is because it's not really been made clear why they're doing that. We still find that if you give a clear message and a very clear call to action, and it's indicative of what's going to happen when you do that, people are very happy to click and will click through to that sort of destination. Hope that answers your question. Okay, so in terms of developing that brand identity, make sure you're questioning stakeholders, try and find out what people value in your trust so that you can develop those USPs. And obviously, John is someone that can really help develop that in more detail, but ensure that that message isn't being used by other trusts in the area, so that it's a distinctive way of talking about yourselves, and your stories are a very good way of doing that. It's worth knowing that, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, that I run a full brand identity masterclass where we look at this in much more detail. It takes you through some key steps as to how you develop that brand identity. So by all means, when I send the email out at the end of this, there'll be a link to where you can go and learn a little bit more about that course. It's free to join and you can free at any time. So when we've got a hold of that, we know what the remarkable is. We know how we want to present ourselves, what we want to say. It's very easy then to just start looking at your collateral, get everything together, look at your website, look at your, your sales brochures, the way that you're communicating on social media, every different way that you're communicating as a trust, and decide whether that's actually reflecting this key message that you want to put across. There's information about the masterclass. I'll put that on later. So what we've developed, I often get asked when I've presented that full brand identity masterclass is, what do we do now? How do we go about sort of putting that together? So we've put together something called the brand identity kit, and this is basically a very easy way for trusts to develop their brand. So we'll basically look at where you are at the moment, and we will help develop the visual aspects of the way that you communicate. Very, very quickly, there's a whole heap of things involved there. We basically look across your communications in every possible way that you communicate, and then present back to you the brand across all of those sort of multiple assets. It really helps improve communications. It's the first step following the work that John's done in making sure that you've got a handle on the way that you're going to present your trust. So to give you a very quick example, this was Oak Academy's trust, and we've developed their new branding. Obviously, we're only looking at the logo at the moment, but once we've got the logo and the color palette and the font choice, we can then expand that onto their website, for example, and show how the key messaging that's been developed during that brand identity can then be brought into the way that the trust presents themselves on the website. So you can see how that would amend itself, and how that brand is then carried through in every way that they're going to communicate and they're going to present. Lots and lots of different collateral that the brand identity kit brings in. And we then went on to work with some of the schools within Oak Trust that were able to rebrand, and we'll be helping. There's 5 schools in total. So we looked at Overdale Infant School, brought their branding in line with the new branding of the trust. We did the same for the Overdale Junior School. So there's a consistency amongst the way that the trust is branded. Very, very quickly, I'll put that on screen for you. There'll be more information that I'll send over in the email at the end, but it's a really quick and easy way of making sure that you start to get this brand identity put together. It's quite involved. We take a lot of time over it and spend quite a lot of time and effort in making sure that it's right. But from your point of view, it's a nice, simple solution for you. Okay, we've got a little bit of time left for us to look at websites as that centralized service. So this is looking at websites as an opportunity really to expand that offering that you're able to make to prospective new schools. At the moment, very often the issues that I hear lots of challenges and frustrations around websites within schools and academies and multi-academy trusts. Those frustrations are that actually, as you grow, you inherit different website systems. So you take on a new school and they've got a different website system to the 4 or 5 schools that you've already got. So I spoke to a trust recently who had 5 different website suppliers. Now they're only a mat of 7 schools. So from a management point of view, it becomes a bit of a headache. That it is a barrier to growth because there's no clear indication as to what the direction is going to be for the multi-academy trust and its school websites. And there's a lack of economy of scale, really. there's no central control over that, or central control becomes really difficult because you're managing relationships with 5 different suppliers, you're managing 5 different service levels, 5 different systems. Staff training becomes difficult and costly because you've got to train them on all of the different systems depending on what school they're on. And it does create a huge duplication of work because you can't just do anything centrally. You've got to do it every time you want it to, you want something to happen on all of those different systems. So I hear that all the time, that this is sort of a frustration with the systems that trusts have got at the moment. Loads of different contracts, as we said. There's no one company that has a handle on the goals and what you need from your website. So as John has mentioned, if you're putting that marketing strategy in place, and that's going to pose lots and lots of questions about what the websites need to achieve for both the trust and the schools, what's difficult is that you can't then sit with a website provider and have them have this holistic look at your website systems and how best to adopt those ideas. You've effectively got to communicate with 5 different people to make sure that that actually happens. And you're going to have to be the coordination between all of that, which again can be a huge frustration. Very hard to manage the trust brand across all of those. And we see all sorts of different things happening with trust brands over websites. So this is just an example that I've brought up. This is Harbour Learning Trust. And the reason I brought it up is you can see that actually as these websites appear, and there are more websites within the trust, I've just brought 6 up, that there is no consistency really between the look and the feel of their websites. That in itself isn't necessarily an issue. However, there is no consistency in the system that each of the websites is using. And perhaps more importantly, there's no consistency in the brand identity of the trust within those sites. So on some of the sites, we've got Harbour Learning Trust's logo. Some of the sites, we've got the Harbour Learning Trust logo and their strapline. Some of the sites, we don't have Harbour Learning Trust at all. So you wouldn't know that this school was part of that whole brand identity. And if you look at the brand identity of Harbour Learning Trust, they've got some very clear messaging. They do it quite well on their own website, but then that's not followed through onto their school website. So again, Woodlands Academy is part of the trust. I would say that the trust's key messaging isn't being represented in any way, but neither is the school. There's not much, again, that I can tell you about this school or who they are or what they stand for or what they're about or why I should engage with them as a parent and send my child there. So across the board, really, there are huge missed opportunities in making sure that we communicate effectively. Some more of these challenges and frustrations. So I did basically quite a lot of market research over the last 18 months, really. And these are the answers that trusts were coming back with. It really annoyed them how very often they'd end up with out-of-date sites because they'd have staff who, they were the person that looked after the website. They then leave. Nobody knows how to update the site. If they contact the company who created it, there's this huge bill to do anything or to update anything, and it just becomes a bit of a nightmare. So you get websites that actually just end up being really out of date and are a bit of a hindrance rather than actually being a positive. There's this huge investment of time and resources. From what trusts tell me, every sort of 4 or 5 years, they're having to rebuild these sites. So it's okay when it gets created, but then it really isn't looked after and it falls into disrepair, and then you rebuild it again 5 years later. And you've just got that cycle that's going round and round. What's happening there is that the websites are being created and are as fit for purpose as possible at that starting point, but then very, very quickly aren't adapting to the needs of the trust and the schools. So as things change in the trust and as things change in the schools, your website needs to develop with you. It needs to make sure that it's reacting to the changing challenges. So 5 years later, the website has no relevance to what the school or the trust looks like and what it's trying to achieve. And it's too expensive, I suppose, to do anything about that. There's a great deal of lack of marketing on trust and school websites. They rarely are designed to achieve those strategic aims. This is going to become so much more important as we look to growth. So again, from a school point of view, let's look at Woodlands Academy. I don't know where you want me to go. As a prospective parent, I've no idea. I'm going to start navigating around this website on my own and hopefully I'll find the information that I'm looking for. What we need are those calls to action that really help us and guide us to where we want to be, as we mentioned earlier on. So we end up with schools and trusts tied up into long contracts, really impossible get out clauses. And as I say, huge cost to any improvement. Compliancy becomes an issue. So we've got this, 5 different systems or 3 different systems, however many you've got there. And when you have a change in policy, it's somebody's job to distribute that policy and then check that whoever's responsible for updating the website in each particular school has actually done that, and then go on and check. And that in itself becomes totally inefficient and a total waste of time and effort, really. You can then look at choosing a single supplier. So we always hoped that people would come to us and use us to provide their websites, but obviously we were then asking them for the money to develop 5, 6, 7 websites all at the same time, which again is going to be costly to do because it's a lot of work. So we've developed a system called Plato, and I wanted to present this to you because we've developed this in answer to that situation, as an answer to trusts that are looking towards growth in the future, as an answer to all of those frustrations that they've reported back to us and that we've seen, to be fair, from the clients that we've been dealing with over the last 20 years. So Plato is a trust-wide multi-website system. It's completely customizable and flexible, and it grows with your trust. The structure of it is very, very simple. And one of the key elements is you never pay upfront for us to create your websites. You simply tell us that you want a website, 3 websites, 10 websites, and you pay a rental for each of the websites that you want. You're effectively renting that space. Just to give you some idea, obviously we're very aware that the issue with trusts having hire purchase agreements and anything like that, it fits perfectly well within the financial limitations of trusts taking loans, etc. So no upfront cost to build your site. You pay the equivalent of about £17 a week for each site, whether that's a trust site or a school site, and then everything else is included in that. So this is allowing trusts to budget exactly what costs they're going to have for their website marketing moving forward, but not only now, but in future. So regardless of how it develops, they know that their website will always be effective because they can always update and amend with no additional cost. So it's always going to be working for them. You can add an additional school at any time. You literally just buy another space, add on the cost every month, and the new school's website is created very, very quickly. Within about 2 or 3 weeks, you get the new website created. There's no additional hosting or licensing. Whole video suite of training for staff to be able to update and go on and amend a website themselves. But because our team does all of that for no cost anyway, lots of our clients are just deciding, well, that's not a function that we actually need in the school. We can free up that space to do other things, and all we need to do is to raise a ticket, drop the amends and the content and the changes that we want, and it happens for us, and it's launched the following day. Another really nice part about Plato, and something that we were really keen on making sure happened, was this frustration around the distribution of information around your trust. It's something that John's talked quite a bit about. So I mentioned if you wanted to update a policy document, for example, what Plato allows you to do is to upload your policy document centrally, so your trust staff can upload that. You've then got your school staff dotted around who also have limited access to their own Plato system in their schools. And the central trust administrator can literally upload a policy and decide this policy needs to appear on all of our schools, only our primary schools, only that secondary school, however they want to do it, but they do it centrally with the click of a button, and the policy is updated. What's really nice is that staff have access to those policies regardless of whether they're logged into the website. So it becomes the central storage of your policy documentation. So as soon as you update a policy, it updates automatically on all of your websites. So that whole compliancy issue is removed, that whole headache of having to talk to lots and lots of different people. What we're trying to do here is to give you a tool that allows you to approach prospective new schools and take that headache away. We've explained there the feedback that we've been getting from schools and academies about their website systems. you can guarantee that's the feedback that you're going to get from lots of schools if you ask the same sort of questions. And this system allows you to basically take that headache away, all of those frustrations. And you can add it at any time. So if you take on a school that's stuck in a contract and can't get out of the contract, that's fine. You just wait until that contract's ended, and then you can add the school to the Plato system. Plato websites are reviewed every year. So our experienced team will go on and will make recommendations about development of the site, changes in functionality, how it could be made better. And because of all your amends are included in your monthly cost, there's no cost to you of doing that. We just want to make sure it's better for you. We're avoiding that whole 5-year replacement cycle because your website will be reviewed and developed, and we're asking questions about what you need it to do on a regular basis and developing the site for you. No long contracts. So the future relationship is basically based on the service that you receive. So you're not tied into it. You can cancel a Plato website at any time. And that's it. Very, very simple. There's no issues with that at all. And we can offer full compliancy testing as well. So just to improve that whole compliancy side of things, we can not only check that your websites are compliant from what Ofsted want, but we'll actually check the content. So we will look at your policy documentation and advise as to whether it's compliant or not. Admittedly, most trusts have that function already in place, but we've come across a few small trusts where that's been really useful for them. So again, to give you an idea, all-inclusive monthly rental from £80 a month for, basically we've aimed that at primary schools, and then £95 a month for schools over 450 pupils, really trying to aim that at secondary schools. Hopefully I've given you some pointers there on my 2 topics, and John before me gave you some pointers on the first 3, so that we've now given you hopefully an outline of a way forward in terms of marketing your trust. What we wanted to do is to give you this opportunity at the end. We're both here for as long as you need us to answer any questions that you've got. And thanks Laura, no problem at all. So if you have any specific questions, please pop on your microphone, or you can drop them into the chat. Either way is fine, and we're here to help as long as you need us. Just going to end that. Hold on a second. I'll get my cursor down. Okay. So does anybody have any questions for us? So a question for you, John. Have you seen multi-academy trusts do the internal comms piece particularly well? And if so, what were the most effective techniques for ensuring schools feel part of the multi-academy trust? And that's come from Chris Bloor.
So the best techniques to make schools feel part of a multi-academy trust are the ones that actually almost, what you might say, transcend comms and marketing. The ones that are there to ensure that everyone is having the same experience when it comes to school improvement. The ones that are there that everyone is having the same experience when it comes to effective development. The ones that are there, it shows that everyone has the same experience through day-to-day casework HR. The specific things that glue people together on their day-to-day journey. And then what we're doing around branding then and around communications and marketing is associating and making sure that the people involved in the organization know that this is coming from them as being part of the trust. Now around that then there's the other few layers within this atom, which is then absolutely proper comms, as we will call it. So effective communication from trust leaders, effective communication in relation to making sure that things like newsletters, any CEO can send a trust newsletter out, but the key is to make the content something that's compelling, and so things that people need and want to know is really, really important. So those would be two real tips there. Making sure that your systems are in place from a whole trust point of view, and also making sure that your communications from trust are compelling.
Okay, thanks, John. Does that answer your question, Chris? Hopefully. Brilliant. Okay. So are there any other questions before we round off? As I say, we will be sending the recording of the session over to you and some further information about how you can contact John and I. That'll all come on an email. If not later this afternoon, then definitely by first thing tomorrow. John, was there anything else that you wanted to add before we wave goodbye to everybody?
No, not at all. And then I'm going to do the traditional thing of saying, but the main thing is to remember that as trusts, however big or however small you are, is that this is, largely new territory for a vast part of this sector. So, don't worry. And going out and asking for help, irrespective of whether your leaders think that is something that you could just magically know about, is absolutely key. I know that Mark and obviously and I are here. Drop us a line for a chat anytime you need to have a chat about something, and we're very, very happy to help out.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Brilliant. Thank you all so much for attending. Really appreciate it. And as John says, if you do have any further questions, feel free to get in contact. You should get all the information through certainly by tomorrow morning, and hopefully we'll see you again on one of our courses. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.